Good, let's just try to to pick up the first conversation and then link it to what has been said in the two presentations. So first, Caroline, let's see how Lars is responding to this idea of animacy. You call animacy. So okay, animacy. So the fact of being alive, in a sense, of being animated, bezield.
No, sharing a number of characteristics of living beings, but not all of them.
Okay. Can you take the mic?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Can you take the mic as well? So is that a fruitful and productive category for your architecture?
Vitalism?
Yeah, vitalism is, but there was a slight deviation on your
well, that was a
critique
in
it.
Warning.
Yeah, it was more or less.
Basically, it's pathology, right?
No.
It's make believe at least. So.
Vitalism is bad science. We know that now. So, but it's great aesthetics. That would be my answer. Yeah. So and I think we really need great aesthetics more than bad science. Now, there's a few remarks. First is that there's different types of vitalism, and there's this weird Ruskin book where he writes a dialogue with little girls. Is that which one? It's not. I forgot the title. He is talking about mountains. Of course, he's always talking about mountains, right? Their structure, the massing, the courses of stones, everything, basically as a thing alive, because he is very. He's like an expressionist, right? So the sculpture of the mountain is sculpted by forces, and it's not just the mass; it's also the texture of the stone that makes that visible. And then the little girls ask, but then a lecturer, because he's hidden as the lecturer, are mountains alive? And he says, no, yeah, all things are less or more alive. And of course, you cut your arm off, that the arm will be dead. And so he has this whole theory, a gradational theory, that all things are no thing is completely dead, and no living thing is completely alive. So they're all sort of gradual states of living. And that's a sort of improved vitalism, because normally vitalism is bad religion too, right? They basically make God immanent and make him a directive force, hidden, right? So it's still forces, but then they're still, they direct. So it's not like delusion forces where it's a mess, and then something comes out. No, it's a force that is directive. It's called teleology. That's sort of bad vitalism. Now, what's interesting about Ruskin is that basically his view is not bad science, but great aesthetics. So it's always a view of art. That means all things are expressed through movement. And therefore he cannot separate between inanimate and animate. Now, one step further, you have pathology, I would agree, or hysteria or schizophrenia or whatever. Kant was actually close to believing in ghosts, I remember. He was like reading Swedenborg, and he wanted to do so. He said that it's not just Ruskin's thing. I'd say it's a much more abstract concept of life. It's not organic life. Organic life normally is seen as taking an abstract life force and making it to a finalized form. And for Ruskin, it's much more like a flow or an abstract entity. So it does make it that you can compare living beings or inanimate objects or living beings all together. So in that sense, there is an empathy, but it's an abstract empathy. It's not an organic empathy in the sense of Waringer, for instance, where the empathy would be really with a natural object that then talks back to you, which is very close to animism, right? Mm-hmm. When the objects are alive. It's really much more an abstract form of life. So in that sense, it's safer, and it's closer to agency and embodiment, and it's basically sharing of movement of bodies, and while they see each other, they resonate. So it's in that sense, it's an abstract sense. It's not really the German sense of organic perception.
Okay, so in a reaction, you talked about architecture as well, about proprioception. So the way that your body, more or less in an analogy, gives you the, connects you to architecture. And then you talked about Kant, which is quite visual. With Kant, the aesthetics of Kant are most visual aesthetics. So is there, when Lars talks about this kind of vitalism, his way of understanding it, is there a possibility to connect these two perceptions, the Kantian and the Wolfling perception in a sense, in order to make it more bodily, which you lack with Kant, and which is there with Wolfling? And can you more or less connect to the vitalism that Lars is projecting?
I think Wolfling would definitely consider himself as a grandson of Kant.
Yeah,
In the
he
sense
does,
that,
he does,
he
yeah.
does, yes. In the sense that he
But there was a body with Wolfling,
yes.
and with Kant there isn't any body.
No, but Wolfling felt that by drawing in the bodily experience, he could, unlike Kant, really account for the experience of architecture as a specific art and not as kind of flat facade painting-like thing. So he could account for what's special about experiencing space, for instance,
Yeah,
or
3D,
tectonics. And I think he would also agree that his aesthetic experience of architecture, even though embodied, is still an expression of the free subject. So in that sense, there is a definite way of reconciling them. But on the other hand, I think that you put, in a much stronger way, the finger on the difficult issue of how architecture can become meaningful if you do away with the easy ways out of modernism, which is structure, function, language.
And agency for that matter?
Well, agency.
Autonomy?
Agency is not the same as autonomy, but it would be a way out of. And
Right,
of
that's what
rethinking
your
vitalism.
option is.
Yes.
So what do you think? You more or less accuse Lars of, when you said the medium takes over, which is very sympathetic to me, but the medium takes over, but then, for instance, for me, that's the issue. We were never in control.
No.
So he doesn't take over, he makes explicit what wasn't there. So, and in a sense, the architecture of Lars, I think, is embodying this idea that you are always embedded in the surroundings and related and not autonomous. So there is, what do you think about this way of approaching the idea of autonomy? Perhaps it's a relative autonomy or a different one, because I think your modernism, in a sense, doesn't fit, well, exactly is what Lars is opposing.
Yes, but I'm not a modernist either.
Well, I'm saying you're a modernist.
No, I'm
So
not.
that doesn't matter. That doesn't say that you are a modernist, but the conclusions, your conclusions, were modernist conclusions. You opt for a way back to autonomy.
No.
Okay.
No. I must have expressed myself very badly then.
Okay, I probably understood it wrong.
No, I think autonomy is not the same as agency.
No, I know.
You can perfectly be totally unautonomous, but exercise a
Right.
very strong agency.
So so can you can you shift that to what Lars is saying?
Yes, I'd say that to understand how an architecture can be totally mediated, and in that sense out of the architect's control, can still, because of its mediatedness, because of thereby being part of the whole nexus, viewer, artwork, artist, the patron, can still exercise its autonomy, or its agency within that nexus. But you have to, for the modernist, autonomy is synonymous with the agency, and I think that's
Really?
a conclusion you don't need to draw.
No, that I wouldn't.
No.
I would be probably the reverse.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd say you can have any autonomy when you have agency, because agency means relatedness, and so there's no autonomy at that point.
No.
But no, of course, the highest. I mean, I remember as a student all these discussions of Eisenman, and there was nothing higher than autonomy. Right, this is sort of the suicide of modernism occurred in deconstruction. It's like when it sort of imploded, that it's sort of kept on doing its pure mind job, right, and denying the body because of it all, like bad phenomenology and stuff that was related, and right, that was the death of autonomy, right, and criticality and all that stuff. So I think agency is really a reversing of that idea. But on the other hand, like animacy and captivation that Gell talks about is a sort of it's for me on the same level as affect. It's not really this, and that's okay, because he's an anthropologist, so that he doesn't have a very precise aesthetic discussion of, so let's say, these levels of agency, of animacy, right? He's not really trying, he's more like trying to disturb the art world with an anthropological view than actually trying to set up a whole concept of how agency can deepen itself and how it can relate back. For sure, agency is really an interesting idea, but it's a bit on the same level as affect, as I'm concerned. It makes feeling very abstract. It says, okay, the body is fine as long as we don't make it too real and we don't accept too much of it. And I think this sort of the whole romantic idea of feeling just dares to step beyond, right, this idea of affectedness or agency. But for sure, an ecological idea of relatedness is for sure in agency. Mm-hmm. The problem I have with Wolflin is that for him matter is on the wrong side. It's inert. It's passive. He has no. For him, it's still Kantian in that sense that he needs the ideal, the ghost, right, to animate matter, and then there's something alive in that matter, right? It made it alive, and that's where you connect to. So basically, you're skipping matter when you see an object. And I think, like even in Ruskin's idea, however how Christian he is, he's sort of what he calls, even in naturalism, he says there's a deep sympathy between us and the material world, right? So for him, that relationship of agency and sympathy is with the material itself, which is alive and can make mountains or buildings, stones of Venice, stones of Switzerland, doesn't care, right? It's basically the same thing for him. Goes from one page to the other.
But can we conclude that agency is only the fact that there is action and there is to be acted, but the motivation of the action is different in the autonomy than in your idea of architecture, for instance. Architecture makes you act, but in a different way than an autonomous way.
Well, that's of course, the problem is that architecture, of course, has to do with behavior and habit. Mm-hmm. And there's no free action. Architects understand that, right? All action is embedded. There's no free action. Even if you're like on the North Pole or something, there's no free action. There's nothing that is not connected to all your preconceptions of how you should behave or what you should do. So when an architecture is mediating, it in the functionalist or utilitarian way of saying, it's telling you what to do, right? Go to the toilet. You have to go like this and this, go down and then go to the toilet. Take the left door.
It conditions your action.
It's totally conditioning. And then agency is so there's one architecture that's autonomous, that's purely of the mind. So you're walking through, but basically your feet don't matter and your arms don't matter. You're just looking up and deconstructing it. Visual. Yeah, visual and mind. That's the Eisenman thing. And the other is the utilitarian thing. It's like, okay, now it's all body, but it's mechanical. It's mechanical, and this is an in-between position, right? It takes away that reflexivity, so it does understand the body as something that feels and acts, but it's what Gibson calls affordance, right? So it's not a single function, but there is a potential of doing. That means you see, and then in your body, through that mood, there's an opening of different types of actions. That's really interesting because Gibson was, of course, interested in landscape and texture. So he said, of course, if we look like how an animal or a bird qualifies a rock, right? Is it a surface that it can walk on, or is it like something it can sit on? It's really the capacity of that texture or landscape. So it's not really like, okay, that rock is a chair, right? It has different opportunities. So and I think that's a really interesting idea because it's not like behaviorist in the sense that one perception leads to one action, but it's a perception that through mood leads to a sort of variety of actions.
Because when it rains, it's harder to stand on the rock, so we don't stand on the rock. So it's dependent on a lot of other parameters that makes you act.
Yeah, so it's mediating, but it's not telling you what to do.
Okay, let us shift to Siebe. Let us try to, because there's when music does something, it is embed you in an environment, in an ambience, and especially the dub or, well, the bass or the jungle is a way of situating people. So can you react on, or can you just first summarize this idea of the dub, which you ended?
Well, I was just trying to imagine the world Lars is writing about. What does it mean to be embedded? Do I experience that now and then? Well, maybe in music, maybe in dub music. And it's one of the few genres in music in which most creators call themselves architects, or the language of architecture, or even let's see, the discourse of architecture is used to describe what's happening. And it's also well, even in the pre-digital area, in the 70s, you have all these interviews with studio musicians who don't talk about instruments. They don't talk about. I mean, they don't have instruments. They use stuff and represent it in something else. They use their equipment. They become one with their equipment. They produce something. For instance, Lee Perry, he called his studio the Black Ark. He created an ark, a spaceship. He created space itself. And so they were experimenting with something else. They didn't need They didn't need anything. They didn't need musicians. They just took stuff and tried to reinvent or embed themselves and also create something, be part of something and create something.
Yeah. Okay, so you use a lot of, well, sounds at least, of ambience.
Yeah, no, that immediately makes me think of the collaborations with Edwin, because we did several projects where basically, normally the architecture would be the stage, right? So you'd have an auditorium and the stage, and the music would be on the stage, and the architecture would be sort of looking at the stage or listening to the stage. And we were trying to sort of both jump in the orchestra pit, right? The architecture would go in and see if we could try to mix. So see if the architecture could influence the music, but also the music can become architectural. Because what's really interesting is, like, where we start, we're always talking about diagrams and sort of abstract functions. And we can just both talk about these abstract modes, because one splits them in the architecture and the one splits them in sound. So it's like having a figure or an image or whatever pattern, and one can think of it as music and the other of sound. And what's really interesting with the studio is that the studio in that sense became an instrument. So the idea that, like in old instrumentalism and good use, right? Richard Sennett is trying to sort of restore good use. So yeah, you're not the hammer, but of course you want to nail in a nail into the wall, you have to become the hammer, right? There's no way that you're going to look at the hammer and drive it in the wall. You have to become, like you have to become the car where you drive a car. So that's of course what he's doing. It's like he becomes the studio, he becomes the instrument. Yeah,
he becomes the studio. There's an interview with Lee Perry when he says, I'm not a producer, I'm not a musician, I'm a cyborg. I've become one with my equipment. And the equipment has become one with the space, and the space has become one with the music.
But that's one definition of craftsmanship.
Of course, it's craftsmanship, but it's also, I was interested in your notions of the ribs. I never thought about it, but I like the whole theory of ribs and the way it is used in Gothic architecture. And that's another thing why I came up with the dub, because I think it's also pulled along, they also choose the way of ribs. Using the bass lines as kind of ribs.
There's a totally dilettante theory about that. That's of course that ribs came from Normandy, and Normandy is Vikings. So Vikings is Norsemen, right? So the rune tombs and Celtic knotwork. So basically all that northern, I won't say Nordic, all that northern ornament, right, of woven, and so we're using ribbons or twigs or hair into braiding. Ruskin only has one paragraph on it, and Worringer has one paragraph on it, and it's really interesting that there's a sort of deep sense of weaving an object. So you have there's no fixed object. You're just making objects out of objects, right? There's this.
Well, it's the same thing. The piece about the ribs that brought me to Salingars and Darton, because they were interested in the hatred by Atta and the other people from the Syrian capitals, where the patterns, the Islamic patterns, were destroyed, and
the visual culture was destroyed in a sense.
Yeah, but I think it might be more than that. When I was reading it like this, and they were blaming 20th century architecture, same like Salingars did, and
so it's like a radical critique, you would say.
I don't know, but I would just say I don't like 20th century. So I think, hey, there's something going on here.
Yeah, but I wouldn't hijack a plane.
No.
Can I bring you just a last, before we go to the audience, a last thing, because that's, when I look at your architecture, we've been talking about space, and about forces, and about sound, but we didn't talk about light. And I think architecture, but perhaps modernist architecture, is about light, in a sense. So where's the light? Where has the light gone?
I haven't discussed space either, by the way.
No, we talked about bodies and forces.
Feeling about space, like.
But let's talk about light.
Yeah, why?
So where? Yeah, because that, you know why. Where's the light? When did the light go out?
Ah, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
The problem is a bit light is basically always connected to platonic volumes and white marble. So it's southern. So I discussed a bit of northern.
Oh,
so
right. It's not Nordic.
The sun,
well.
the light puts us in the south. So you get a metaphysics of idealism goes with light. Everything comes from above. It sharpens the volume. It sharpens Platonic perception. And basically Gothic is rain, mud, dark.
But there's also this rose and this the lumen, the heavenly light, and so why didn't you incorporate that? Because there is light.
No, there's
artificial light.
Between, like God is light and stuff like that.
But in your architecture, there is light, but it's different light. It's from within.
Light, yeah.
But it's light from within,
That's
not
glowing,
from without.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So why?
Well, I was thinking, how can I reverse the modernist argument, right? Which is one of translucency and transparency and a phenomenal transparency. So basically, the structure is always like transparent, and it's basically the street that goes in, right? That's the revolutionary street, the street of the masses, needs to be part of the interior of the building, right? So anti-Art Nouveau cocoon and stuff like that, right? So it needs to go through, and electronic media, of course, go through it, so to get this whole transparent Crystal Palace universe. So I was thinking, how can I sort of rethink light? And I started to think like, oh, maybe it can radiate. So instead of like light going through it, it would glow like radiate.
Can I do a suggestion why it came into your work like this? Yeah? So perhaps it has to do with the computer and the screen. So why? So explain this to me before we go to the audience. Explain this to me. Why?
It's a dangerous discussion.
Yeah, but it's a very nice discussion, and it's dangerous because I think there is something in your work that hasn't been worked out yet.
But there's a lot of glowing objects.
There are glowing objects like a screen.
Yeah. No, I just didn't want to talk about my own stuff.
No, that's true. But okay, then last thing, craftsmanship and digitality.
Yeah.
Sennett is talking about craftsmanship and digitality.
Yeah, well,
programmer and so on.
Yeah.
So apart from the fact that it's perhaps not adequate and it's beside the point, but you are opting for a craftsmanship with your CAD.
Well, digital craft. No, it's not CAD at all.
Okay, so explain this to me.
Well,
how does it come back with Ruskin and the craftsmanship?
Well, that's a sort of stretching the argument a bit, but since I related savageness to change, basically variation and imperfection, I read of course, for Ruskin, savageness is the moment when the design goes to the execution. So you go from master mason, who's controlling the changefulness because he's designing the beautiful tracery. Then he gives it to the master mason, to the stone mason, who then makes mistakes because he has frozen hands. He's from the north, whatever, right? So he starts to interpret the drawing because the drawing is not so exact. So he makes mistakes, and for Ruskin, that's a sort of Christian humanist argument, right? So that allowing for mistakes,
imperfection,
For imperfection is, and my argument is a bit different because I say, look, if you can only understand tracery because there's already movement in the figures. So I put work agency or activity, I put that immediately in the design itself, and that's a digital act, right? So when I see things scrolling over my screen, that's a self-working, a self-drawing mechanism. So I allow myself to put the humanist argument of Ruskin, like the execution in the design, and I'm allowing mistakes done by the machine. So of course he would sort of throw bricks at my face now immediately, if not.
But through the screen, probably.
Yeah. My only argument is that because my argument is of course not completely historical. So I go, because if I want to move Ruskin to our age, I have to make it conceptual first. Because I cannot say, look, we have to start a utopia or a guild of St. George and we all have to start chopping stones and whatever. Then we maybe get one house done. Well, yeah, in 40 years, right? And then we're swamped by the generic city. So I think our enemy is the generic city, so to say. Rem's generic city.
Of course.
So, yeah. No, I mean, we're swamped by one Shanghai after another. You have to adjust the map of Beijing every year. The taxi driver cannot take you to the outskirts because he doesn't know where it is, and it's a cancerous.
Okay, before the discussion gets out of hand.
No. These are my morals of the object.
This is too effective a judgment.
Look, you can go slow. You can go slow foot and chop your Gothic church either in some cave, or you can teach your machine to stereotomically have your robots trained to cut Sagrada Familias one after the other, right? And then say, okay, now let's have a jungle, right? So do you want like 100 Shanghais or do you want the tropics?
Okay. We have provoked the audience, probably, some of the audience. So let's open up to the audience. And well, once you give it to the audience, we always say it's gone, but then something else comes in. The fragmentary, the imperfect, the non-coherent. So please, be our guest. Be interesting, right, thank you. Okay, how are we going to handle this?
Is there, you're all here.
Are there any questions? Yeah. Or do you want Lars to speak on and on and on and on? No questions. What time is it? Okay, so we have time enough. Are there really no questions? So crystal clear? Okay, then shall we go on here and just, okay. Yep. Yeah.
I'm sorry, my voice is my voice is rather bad at the moment, but there's a link that I miss because the first speaker, Henk, was talking about this ecology, is talking about cradle to cradle, and so on. And could you, one of you, connect this to the ideas of Lars and the fake
I'd like to do that myself.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks.
So basically, I think the whole sustainability discussion is only bringing us halfway. So it doesn't make it a problem of design, it makes it a problem of making and of the use of materials. Now, I'm not saying that the use of materials is not important, but for me it's a matter of design, a variation. So I don't believe in his box that has an imperfect cardboard or a wabi-sabi wood or whatever. I don't think that's enough. So I cannot see, let's say, a materiality without design. And the whole discussion of sustainability is what materials we use, and it's really important, but you can still have crap design that blocks all sympathy, right? And your relationships with the world, there's just only that local relationship with that non-wasted material, which is important in itself, but it does not create sympathy. It just takes the waste out right? But it's more a problem of engineering than of design.
Can I react on this? Because I'm... Okay, so I think what you are doing is disconnecting design and ecology. That's what you're doing, basically. You say ecology is for the materials, it has to do with...
No, I was talking about sustainability, not about ecology.
Right, so sustainability as a variation or a mode of ecology. So I'm talking about ecology, not about sustainability. For me, only sustainability is an eco-political aspect, sustainability, and responsibility is a geopolitical aspect. So for me, ecology has to do with relations, and that's where we can meet.
Yeah.
So the moment you accept the circular, or what I said, the feedback and the looped existence, in a sense, because of the speed, exactly the speed where you were talking about, and the forces where you were talking about, then the design gets an ecological dimension. So you can no longer disconnect ecology. You can disconnect sustainability, that's true. But you can't disconnect ecology from designing, because you are working the process, the very core of the process is the feedback loop and the way that you interrelate and accumulate the relations. And that's a way of sympathy in your terms. In my terms, a way of interest. So perhaps interest and sympathy can be compared in a way. But I really disagree on that you can disconnect. Well, nowadays, disconnect, for me that's the real problem, that we disconnect it, but you cannot disconnect design from ecology. But then, of course, you have to diversify ecology, and that's what I did in a different context. But for me, ecology is not only a physical aspect, it's also a social and a mental aspect. And then ecology becomes something more diverse, in which design, especially in the social and the mental aspect, is taking its part. Well, that's not really what we're up to. But that was a question and you have an answer. That's the most important thing. Okay, yeah. So are there any more?
Yes, I have a question. This slogan, our whole lives are nothing but matters of design, it means everything is design, right? Yeah. Can you imagine anything that is not design? No. No? So the term doesn't mean anything anymore? Yeah. Right, so we should... So we can cut the design off.
Well, there's no innocence anymore. That's what it means. So that because innocence means you can still be surprised by acts of God or whatever, right? So that you can still have facts. That's what Latour does. He opposes the world matter of facts to the one that matters of concern. And it's clear that a religious world is one of that facts reign on us, so to speak, right? You just get facts over you. You try to deal with it with a bit of religion and a bit of art. And matters of concern are different because it's basically you are responsible for your life, right? Your life is a project. You have to get everything out of it. You have to get all the values. You have to have your child as a project, right? You have to raise it as a project. Your career is a project. Everything you do is a project. And project is very close to object, right? It's something that is thrown into. So you are responsible for the design of it. You cannot longer live the life that's given to you. It's the religious notion. So the religious notion is out, and we are now all responsible. That's the world of design. And yeah, there's no facts left.
Can I ask Caroline to react on it and to just open up this question a bit more? Can you react on this? Because philosophically there are some problems, I think.
Yes, there are.
There are. So please.
There are, yes. In a way, it matters on what you mean by design. There's this whole...
Things that are constructed
or in which you project yourself onto the world.
Either a life or an object or an engine. All things that we do.
Mountains.
That means that it's a rational endeavor.
Yeah. But I keep hearing this romantic dream, which Ruskin also has. That's
That's the point.
the world's. Yeah, no, it's not
It's
bad.
sweet, it's sweet.
It's very
It's
interesting.
picturesque.
It returns in 2009 suddenly. But the world's too much with us. Huh? It's just awareness on the one hand. There's no such thing left as unsullied, pure nature. And at the same time, this deep wish to return to about which Ruskin writes very eloquently. But at the same time, he knows, like we do, that everything has been touched by us. So, and that's why I think in the end, the ecology of design is a variety of make-believe, which is not a way to say it's bad. I think make-believe, the awareness of make-believe is a higher awareness. It's, in a way, it's much more sophisticated.
Starting a movement. You say, look, I want to make believe.
Yeah, I know. No, of course you don't have to tell them, but no, but it's a very different kind of rhetoric from the rhetoric of modernism.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a nice story. There's the most famous Gothic architect who ever lived was Cyrus Pinckney, the architect who built Gotham City in the Batman comics. And why Gotham City? It's Gotham City because it's a Gothic city. And in the Batman sociology, there is this early 19th century architect, Cyrus Pinckney. And he's financed by the grandparents of Bruce Wayne. And they were abolitionists, religious freedom fighters, and they wanted to construct the ideal world, a Gothic world. So they created, all these architects, they created this world, beautiful, in which everything is the ecology of design. Everything is connected. So you got this beautiful Gothic city in which everything is connected and connected and connected and connected. And one day, everything is so connected so well that it starts getting dark. So there is a Gothic cathedral is dark as well.
Yeah.
And then something slowly happens. I mean, the city, this ideal community was built to keep the evil out, to show people the lamp of life, how to live your way in a good way. But in their enthusiasm, they built the city so beautifully that it kept everything in. So darkness and evil couldn't go out anymore. So it created demons like Batman. And so there is something, there is, I think, a little bit of fundamentalism in the idea of the Gothic dream. What is it? Everything is made of something. And I like the story because that's why we have these comics and we can, relate to Gothic ideas and what happened after that, and modernism took over when Gotham City became kind of New York. Well, the end of the story is, I don't think everything is made of anything.
Oh, we're going deep down into mystique now, but let's yeah, okay. So let's see whether we can cheer up with a new question from someone of the audience. Is there still another question? There's at least a hand. Okay.
Hi. Yeah, I'm interested in this concept of scarcity that you were talking. Scarcity. You were saying it was an ideological construct. Then you were saying it was a quantum of psychic energy. And then it was Hegel, empty is full, full is empty. And then you lost me. I was, so.
After 40 minutes.
Well, it's just, I was just wondering, I'm just, and it's a general question maybe for everybody, but how does scarcity, where is the scarcity in an ecology of design?
Okay. So the point that I try to make is that that scarcity nowadays is an ideological construct. It's make-believe, in the words of the former discussion. In the sense that we live in a world of abundance. And the whole idea of abundance is that we only can see the abundance when we change the power relations and the way that we distribute the energy. Simple thing, there's a sun, and when we really try to get that energy, then a lot of things are over. The only thing is that we can't do that because it would destroy all power relations and finally would destroy society. That's the reason why you need the make-believe of scarcity. And the market creates the idea of scarcity by the ever-increasing acceleration of production. And so we have to buy this, and do we already have the newest version of the Nokia? Or do we have to take Andermolmeester of this summer, and are we already anticipating on the winter collection? And so there's this lag built into our system, in the desire system. So that's why I say that within the current situation, scarcity, as for that matter, identity, are ideological constructs that are kept in bay by consumer society. The other side of the argument is, when there is abundance, there's also excess. And excess, in the sense with an E, not with an A, excess is of course a problem because it has a violent aspect. And that's where the morals come in again. So once we learn to take care of abundance, there's a different way of handling relations. But nowadays we still are taking care of relations under the axis of scarcity. So that's why I more or less took Rifkin in and showed one model how we could redistribute energy and solve a few problems, and ended that paragraph with the remark that the present situation doesn't allow this to happen because that would destroy the power monopolies. So that's the idea behind it. But so you can change your perspective and look at society from this perspective of abundance, and then at least I see only excess and abundance, and not scarcity, right? Only it is not well distributed, and the scarcity is also not well distributed.
You know, I don't want to throw Ruskin in the room all the time, but
Come on,
he
make it romantic.
He basically said the damned lie, scarcity is the damned lie of economics. Yeah, that's Ruskin, 1860.
Invented in the
And he
17th
started
century.
talking about abundance. So if you look for a theory of abundance, read Ruskin. It's like there's whole books by Ruskin on abundance. And basically it's because design is equated with value. That basically the monster of capitalism is that that all objects become values and priced, right? So that for him is a sort of his Christian criticism of capitalism. He basically says we should like disequate value and objects. Life is wealth. Another vitalist quote. Life is wealth. So if you're alive, that starts by being wealthy. Right, so being alive for him, like work is like being alive, making things that's like being alive, and it's all without value. So therefore it's abundant.
And if you take this on a philosophical level, then of course the ideas of Nietzsche, and in the traces of Nietzsche, oh well, I can take another philosopher if you want. Russell. Wittgenstein. But Wittgenstein also says this, you know, so. So, so that's where Deleuze comes in, of course. It's a matter of affirming, not the excess, but and that's for me the reason why design is so important. Design is an intervention into abundance and creating quality. And so this is a different approach for design. Not pulp, quality. But then you have to have criteria for quality, and then the problem comes again. Because that's really the big problem. What is quality? It's institutional, because it's in a museum. Well, whatever you take, you have to find some criteria to define quality within a certain context. There's no universal quality, it's nonsense. But that's where design comes in. So design is now used for scarcity, for the ideological construct, and eco-relational design is used to create quality. Context-bound quality. And then you have to make explicit the criteria for that quality. That can be human wellness, that can be well-being, that can be a very nice painting, is possible too. Doesn't matter. But you have to find, you have to be... No, the pleasure is
Well-being. Who wants to be well? I mean,
I want to be well.
yeah, but it's like lying in a bathtub.
Okay, but there's some masochistic element in it as well. But okay, but that's an answer to your question, more or less. Okay. Okay. So there's something in the audience that says that's not a question, that's an imperative, I think. But I think it has to do with time, and we're about, it's 10 o'clock, isn't it? So okay, we just finish at this very arbitrary moment. But I'm sorry, and I apologize for the 3/4 of an hour. Really, I do. But I hope that we afterwards more or less compensated it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.